Welcome to meeting number 19 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 and the motion adopted by the committee on October the 23rd, 2020, the committee is studying Canada's efforts to reform the World Trade Organization. Today's meeting is webcast and is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. I would like to welcome our witnesses for this first panel. From the Business Council of Canada, we have Trevor Kennedy, Director, Trade and International Policy, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Matthew Poirier, Director, Trade Policy, Centre for International Governance and Innovation. Bob Fay, Managing Director, Digital Economy. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Thank you for the invitation to take part in your meeting today on reform of the World Trade Organization. So the Business Council of Canada is composed of 150 chief executives and entrepreneurs of Canada's leading enterprises. Our members directly and indirectly support more than 6 million jobs across the country and hundreds of thousands of small businesses. And representing different industries and regions, these men and women are united in their commitment to improve the quality of life for all Canadians. And so we are a trading nation. Our prosperity and living standards depend on trade. 65% of our GDP is tied directly to trade. The post-war rules-based system under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and now its successor, the World Trade Organization, propelled economic growth and facilitated the expansion of our firms into new markets. Throughout this period, global merchandise trade grew by average on 6% a year among its members. And today, WTO members account for 98% of global trade. While bilateral deals, including NAFTA and now CUSMA, the CPTPP and CITA have helped to grow the pie, many of our firms continue to rely on the global system for access to critical markets and to ensure there are common, predictable, and enforceable rules around the world. As Canada looks to rebuild its battered economy, the global system will be even more important for Canadian exporters to succeed in the post-pandemic world. Merchandise exports to the world fell by 12.3% in 2020, a decline of $70 billion. So as with any relevant organization, WTO requires both maintenance and modernization. Unfortunately, because of disagreements around key elements like dispute settlement, we have not been able to advance this organization for some time. Given recent challenges it faced, and some have even questioned the long-term viability of the WTO. But not Canada. In an effort to be constructive and provide steps toward modernization, Canada took the lead by creating the Ottawa Group. With EU members, Japan, Australia, among other important countries on board, the Ottawa Group represents a critical mass of like-minded partners that are serious about reforming the system. Canada played another important role in establishing the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, the MPIA, which includes many Ottawa Group members and several countries outside that group. The MPIA is a critical stopgap measure to ensure the WTO dispute settlement mechanism continues to function among several leading economies. But we know this is not an alternative to WTO reform. The Business Council of Canada has been supportive of both the Ottawa Group and the MPIA. For the past year, our President and CEO, Goldie Hyder, has proudly served as WTO Business Advisory Council co-chair to the Minister of International Trade. In this capacity, we have supported the government in its effort to drive more private sector engagement in Canada and with our international business counterparts in the Ottawa Group process. Last year, we organized roundtables on issues including e-commerce and dispute settlement. The latter included high-level participation from the U.S. private sector, a key stakeholder if we are to achieve meaningful WTO reform. Dispute settlement is by no means the only thing the WTO does, but due to long-standing disagreements over its function, has become a roadblock to moving the rest of the organization forward. It is critical that we bring the US back to the table, and we believe Canada and the Ottawa Group is well positioned to do that. Early signs from the Biden administration, such as its support for the new Director General and openness from Congress, is encouraging. At the same time, many of our counterparts, or my counterparts in the US, consider WTO reform and restoring its functionality a priority. The Council and its members are eager to support efforts to engage the U.S. government and private sector to achieve reform. And if we work together in good faith, I believe we can overcome our disagreements. Beyond repairing dispute settlement, the WTO needs to change with the rapidly evolving global economy. As an example, we believe recent developments such as the WTO Joint Statement Initiative on e-commerce negotiations can liberalize and create a level playing field for Canadian firms in fast-growing areas of our economy, including digital trade and e-commerce. We were pleased to join the International Chamber of Commerce and a wide group of international business groups in a letter supporting these negotiations earlier this year. So in conclusion, Canadian business leaders value the role the WTO plays in our economy and support reform and modernization to ensure it remains a relevant institution. We encourage Canada to continue its important work within the Ottawa Group. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak here today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. On to Mr. Poirier, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Canada's 90,000 manufacturers and exporters and our association's 2,500 direct members to discuss World Trade Organization reform. Our association's members cover all sizes of companies from all regions of the country and all industrial sectors. We represent the majority of Canada's manufacturing output, as well as Canada's value-added exports. Manufacturers are some of Canada's largest exporters, and global trade is the lifeblood of our sector. The manufacturing process relies on global supply chains to source and to make all the goods the planet needs. Our sector sells products to every corner of the earth, sustains good, high-paying jobs in Canada, and creates wealth and prosperity for all Canadians. Therefore, the WTO and standardized global trading norms more broadly are critically important to managing the trade our industry and our economy relies on. Since its inception, the WTO has been instrumental in setting the rules for global commerce and for solving disputes that arise while conducting business abroad. It has been a singular achievement and has established an international framework for productive and peaceful international trade. This doesn't mean that we haven't encountered problems along the way. Our research shows that Canada's share of global exports started to decline around the same time China was admitted to the WTO at the beginning of the century. Having such a negative and large player enter the club meant that Canada and its allies were at a cost disadvantage overnight. And once legitimized by WTO membership, China increasingly became an indispensable part of global supply chains, and we are inextricably linked to it today as a result. The WTO's handling of the China question will undoubtedly define its future and the future of global trading, of the global trading order. In any event, a lot of time has passed since the WTO's inception in the 90s. Much like how NAFTA started to show its age before we moved on to CUSMA, the WTO is now clearly in the same situation. Worse, the dysfunction we've seen in recent years at the WTO threatens its very existence and makes reform of the organization not a nice to have, but a must do. CME supports the WTO, its necessary reform, and is especially appreciative of our government's efforts at modernization through the Ottawa Group. It is an example of global leadership, and we commend Minister Ng for spearheading this initiative. For too long, everyone around the globe has whined about the WTO, but this push is the only real effort to actually do something about it. CME is proud to be part of this work, and it is definitely something we hope to support in the years ahead. Because of the work of the Ottawa Group, we believe Canada is now in a position to play a larger role in the reform movement. Canadian manufacturers and exporters believe the following principles and areas of focus should be included in the WTO reform agenda. Number one, strengthen the WTO's monitoring function. This is a core responsibility of that body. The WTO is meant to police actors and ensure countries are living up to the rules and standards of their trade agreements. Transparency is key, and without it, actors can be tempted to use trade distorting practices. And without proper monitoring and the production of real trade data, these distortionary actions are easier to slip in. Therefore, a robust and enhanced monitoring ability would keep everyone honest and potentially avoid having to resort to and overburden, frankly, the dispute resolution mechanisms of the WTO. Number two would be to strengthen those dispute settlement mechanisms. When monitoring and mitigation fails, the dispute settlement mechanisms need to be able to resolve disputes between trading partners quickly and fairly. Emphasis added on the quickly part. Before the appellate body atrophied last year, it was still taking years for decisions to wind their way through the system. This creates the incentive for bad actors to exploit and game the system, intentionally bog down disputes because it's in their interest to do so. More concerningly, it removes consistency and stability for business, and the trade ecosystem suffers as a result. Area number 3, modernize trade rules to avoid falling further behind. Because there's been a lack of consensus on how to update global trade rules, countries have gone about resolving those issues in bilateral or multilateral trade deals, like Canada has. If the WTO cannot keep up, it will inevitably be left in the dust. Canadian manufacturers and their global peers run into so many issues when trading abroad. Unfair competition from state-owned enterprises, dumping, currency manipulation, industrial subsidies, and trade barriers more generally. This is in addition to global trade rules not coming to terms with broader issues like digital trade, sustainable development, and environmental regulations. In order to tackle all of these issues, Canada should seek consensus with like-minded countries and prioritize which challenges to address first and then update those rules accordingly. So to recap, WTO modernization efforts must focus on strengthening, monitoring, and dispute resolution mechanisms and work with like-minded nations to update the rules. However, as you've heard me say here before, while WTO reform work is very important to Canadian manufacturers and exporters, we still have the problem of our domestic industry's increasing inability to take advantage of global trade. Canada's manufacturer exporters are too small and at full capacity. Generally speaking, Canada has a higher proportion of its businesses being small SMEs than most of our global competitors. From a fundamental structural perspective, then, we need to get our companies to invest in their businesses and help them grow and scale up. Larger companies are simply better positioned to take advantage of global trade. The Canadian government is uniquely positioned to help in this way by continuing to support exporters through its various agencies, but also by investing in mentorship and trade skills training. So we need to increase our production capacity and our domestic trade expertise to tackle this problem. In conclusion, CME strongly supports Canada's efforts and its leadership in WTO reform. This is not some arcane theoretical exercise. It has real-world consequences and will only become more important if we see this retrenchment trends in global trade as a result of the pandemic continue. A strong rules-based enforcement body such as the WTO will be even more necessary in that scenario. But it is all moot if we do not help Canadian industry first at home. Only then will we be able to reap the benefits of global trade and thrive. Thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poirier. On to Mr. Fay, please.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members, for the opportunity to present the views of the Center for International Governance Innovation, or CIGI, on World Trade Organization reform. So as we've heard, the WTO faces many challenges. Indeed, it is experiencing a crisis of legitimacy in each of its three core functions: negotiation, dispute settlement, and transparency. And more generally, the WTO finds itself struggling to respond effectively to the challenges of rapid economic, political, social, and technological changes. Multilateralism and rules-based trade cooperation are critical for Canada's prosperity and relations with the world. As a middle power with a trade-dependent economy, Canada has both the incentive and the capacity to contribute enlightened ideas and advance novel reform initiatives to the WTO. And as we have also heard, Canada has done so with the creation and leadership of the Ottawa Group to guide WTO reform efforts. So I will first provide specific reform ideas within each of the WTO's three core functions, and then I'll turn to areas where trade rules need to be modernized. And more detail is provided obviously in the background brief and on the CIGI WTO reform essay series that can be found on our website. So turning first to the negotiation role. So the WTO today is negotiating on a wide range of issues. And indeed, the trade governance agenda is almost always entirely a trade and agenda, with this and list daunting. It includes labor, gender, indigenous peoples, climate change, the environment, data, digital issues, e-commerce, human rights development, and intellectual property. And it's hard to visualize the WTO dealing with these issues in their entirety, much less adjudicating disputes around them. CIIT suggests that member states reinvent the WTO by abandoning the effort to manage so many behind-the-border issues that cover such disparate elements of economic and social policy. The single undertaking approach, where all manner of topics were pooled to make broad-based progress while allowing for trade-offs between them, should be ended. Nevertheless, the WTO must continue to monitor these diverse areas. And indeed, all WTO members could be mandated and provided incentives to report trade impact assessments on these and issues to develop a better database for measuring the distributive consequences of trade measures. Now, the WTO must also place a greater focus on facilitating negotiations and increasing barrier-free trade. And although multilateralism is best, in current circumstances, a plurilateral approach is more workable, where it can help to build consensus among like-minded countries. And an example of such approach was the agreement with Canada, Chile, and New Zealand on issues of trade and Indigenous peoples. The WTO can also work better with other international organizations, other stakeholders, and create expert groups to develop consensus on technical issues. And bringing in the group of 20, the G20, it might be useful in helping to choose among the options and setting a realistic course for WTO modernization. The G20 could also be used to achieve consensus and reach compromise on key issues over which the WTO is negotiating and help to develop a program of work for the WTO. Now turning to the dispute settlement system that has understandably attracted much attention. The impasse over the appellate body threatens the whole system and distracts from discussion of other improvements that would make the dispute settlement system more inclusive and effective for many members. And in fact, for many WTO members, the WTO functions well. The roots of the dispute settlement system problems stem from the relationship between the WTO panels that are the first step in dispute resolution, and then the next stage, which is the appellate body. The standard for appellate body review should be reshaped more towards a deferential one, in which reasonings and findings of the panels are respected when they are of a bilateral nature, less involving third-party interest, and those relating to technical matters. While there's hope that the appellate body issue may be resolved with the appointment of a new Director General, to cope in the absence of its functioning, there are other solutions, and we've heard that Canada with the EU and other countries agreed to the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement. And then in addition, members could follow no appeal agreements and use dispute settlement mechanisms in other trade agreements. So now turning to the third core function of monitoring. Effective trade cooperation depends upon information sharing of national measures that might affect trade. And the current paralysis in the WTO is caused in part by insufficient information on which to pursue informed negotiations and deliberations. Government notifications remain the most important source of information, but many governments face capacity challenges in complying with these requirements. Notifications can be improved by ensuring that information requirements are fit for purpose and by providing support for capacity building of governments to gather and share information. And the Secretariat could also be tasked to compile this information. Now, China presents a special case, especially with its subsidies notifications, but it could be encouraged to centralize notifications, make them in the original language, and have other members counter-notify China's measures from their own sources. And then the WTO trade policy reviews could be improved by making their timing more flexible, their content more targeted and detailed, and their discussions more appropriate. So let me now turn to three areas where trade rules need updating. And the first is development and trade. Addressing development issues will be important to successful WTO reform, including ways to provide flexibility in the rules for developing countries that is commensurate with their level of development and building their capacity to take on new commitments. There is a need to encourage efforts to find solutions-oriented approaches to the controversial issue of developing country status and eligibility for special and differential treatment. Next, digital trade. The digital transformation and the data-driven economy call into question numerous aspects of the WTO system. Digital trade goes well beyond e-commerce. It includes cross-border data flows with implications for data and AI governance, competition, privacy, intellectual property, and other areas. Much of the technical regulation in these areas must be developed through parallel process outside the WTO and then fed into WTO negotiations. We must also be wary of using regional trade agreements that can act as stepping stones into other policy spaces and become a multilateral standard. More generally, the WTO should not be the organization that determines the division of rents in the intangibles economy. And here I would refer to, committee members to remarks that I made to this committee on CUSMA in February 2020 in this area. Now, finally, turning to what's referred to as TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. So during decades of negotiation, all parties have recognized that the world trade system could not function without integrating intellectual property. Now, the advent of artificial intelligence and the explosion of cross-border data flows changes the economics of innovation and the nature of trade, and thus requires a rethinking of TRIPS. And this could be done in conjunction with the World Intellectual Property Organization and other international bodies that could then feed into the implications for trade by the WTO. So in conclusion, there are many strategic choices awaiting the WTO. At the same time, it is important to keep in mind that the WTO's enduring strength is as a form of compromise, where consensus results are not always economically or politically optimal. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fay. On to the committee. Mr. Abutai for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you for witnesses, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Poirier, and Mr. Fay. WTO, of course, we hear problems. We hear dispute settlements, negotiation function, transparency and accountability or notifications. Canada have stepped up with many countries that they do share the same worries on probably different agendas to be able to somehow counter back and try to lobby for a improvement to the system, fix into the system, and at least doing something about the existing problems that WTO is going through. Now we have, of course, China is a big player now beside the United States, and it seems like the big economies are somehow trying to eat the lunch of the others in a way or the other, and that's appearing here and there in different fashion. Now, Canada took the initiative with the Ottawa Group and working on MPIA to somehow improve the system. My question to you, the three, of course, witnesses, is what other options countries like Canada have? Do we have an option through a specific legislations to somehow change course? Because that will, of course, will lead to pre-negotiation on any trade agreements or on any future relationships when it comes to trade relationships. So do we have an option to change legislations in Canada in order to be able to change the course over things that happen with WTO? And feel free to, who's going to start? I'm happy with either one of you.
Someone would like to answer?
Can I choose, as I start with Mr. Kennedy, for example?
Sure, thank you. I would, rather than looking at legislation, I think, as I noted in my opening remarks, I do think Canada has a as a policy window at the moment with the new administration to engage on this issue. There's an openness in the United States right now. Very encouraging language coming out from different policymakers at different levels. And I really think Canada should lead the charge to engage the United States. That's the best path forward, in my opinion.
Mr. Poirier.
Sorry, I would have to agree with Mr. Kennedy. I don't see off the top of my head a legislative path domestically. Like I mentioned, Canada's already showing great leadership through the Ottawa Group about reform and leading other people. Let's also face it too, Canada does benefit from the WTO as sort of a middle player, more so than the big countries that you mentioned yourself. So it's in our interest as well to have a WTO that functions and doesn't sort of wither on the vine and disappear, right? So I think that our efforts currently are well placed, and that we should continue pushing on that front as well.
Thank you. Mr. Fay.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I agree with my fellow witnesses that what we want to do is essentially work with countries where we share similar views and values, and that really is a plurilateral approach. And we know that a multilateral / plurilateral approach is an effective way to influence global discussions. So if we can get a lot of countries to agree in a certain area, and this is the Ottawa Group, purpose, then we can push ahead to make it more global. I think I'd like to bring up one other point though, and that is, I don't really want to comment on domestic legislation per se, but I do think it's important that Canada has well-defined views to bring to the table. And this is particularly important on the digital economy. And when one thinks about the whole myriad of issues that pertain to it. So for example, take something like data governance, where Canada is still working on its position. We risk taking on board what other countries have already defined, like the EU and the General Data Protection Regulations. So.
Well, thank you. Good feedback. Now, on the nuts and bolts, if I'll ask you a specific questions over the trade barriers that Canada's industries have to top list. Let's say if we say top 2 worries or barriers that we believe our industry is going to be facing, would you be able to name for me those top, let's say top 2? And the question to all of you, I'll start with Mr. Fay.
Brief answers, please.
I think I'll leave trade barriers to my colleagues. I would think that, but a big issue going forward is intellectual property and the division of rents.
Chair, would you allow the 2 other witnesses to just give us brief answers, please?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Poirier.
Yeah, certainly. For us, the trade barriers are really country dependent. But a common one for manufacturers comes from standards. So, and that's through the regulatory process or otherwise. But just to give an example, a part will arrive in a port in a foreign country and with auto manufacturing parts in it, let's say, for example, and then all of a sudden the requirements that are needed for those parts will change and those parts stay sitting on the dock for months on end until they can comply. That's a trade barrier. That's intentional.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier. I'm sorry, Mr. Abataille, I have to move on.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, for allowing the extra time. Thanks.
Diane, please, it's your.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and allow me to thank our witnesses for the encore performance. A lot of familiar faces here today. I hope you realize that it speaks to the value that we put on your perspective and your testimony. And certainly you delivered once again in your opening remarks. I found it very interesting. All three, Mr. Poirier, you mentioned a number of specific areas in need of reform. And one of the things that you pointed to was, of course, a quick resolution of disputes when they do arise. It's certainly something that I've heard. And obviously it was a little bit the raison d'etre of forming the Ottawa Group originally, although it has evolved, as you mentioned, into something bigger, which is thanks to Canada's leadership. And I think that going back to the quick resolution of disputes just for a moment is important. Just if you can help enlighten the committee as to what you're hearing on the ground from your manufacturers and exporters. Is this something that you hear as a concern from them before disputes even arise? Is it something that you hear more after disputes have commenced? And how does it impact Canadian businesses?
No, thank you, Madam Bandea, and that's a great question. It depends on the issue. We certainly heard about the softwood lumber lows, but the WTO has been helpful for most part on resolving those. Again, the emphasis is, does it happen fast enough? So when we've taken cases recently before the bodies or the appellate body atrophied, what we see is that because other players know that it takes so long to do it, that the gaming happens almost instantly around that. So for businesses, they might get a solution in 3-4 years time, while in that amount of time, the strategy could have been to, build up the price of a stock that's in competition or whatever. These are disputes that we've had with our closest neighbors too. And by the time that courses its way through and a decision's made that's ultimately favorable for Canada, well, the stock price of the competitors in the other country has already risen. They've cashed out and moved on. That's a deliberate business strategy, a devious business strategy, but one nonetheless, because it works. So that's a good example of how having a slow dispute settlement process really impacts players, especially smaller markets like Canada, who really do rely on these systems to seek justice, because it might not have the weight to throw around as other countries do.
Thank you. And you mentioned in your earlier comments how important the WTO is to Canada, because of our relatively small population size. We do need to export in order to grow our companies. And of course, you mentioned that other middle powers like Canada do benefit disproportionately from the WTO. I was wondering if there are any comments on the floor from our witnesses with respect to how the business community is feeling about this renewed interest on the part of the United States to engage on this issue. Of course, we saw that thanks to the United States' change in administration, we do have a new Director General of the WTO from Nigeria. This is the first time that we have a woman, let alone an African woman, at the head of the WTO. So perhaps some thoughts from Mr. Fay, Mr. Kennedy, and Mr. Poirier on how the business community is feeling about this change in mood and direction.
I'm sorry, I can't speak on behalf of the business community, but I can speak on behalf of a think tank, and we have done consultations at CIIT for global affairs, and it's very encouraging to see the change in administration and the approach to more multilateral efforts. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and there are a lot of things that do need to change at the WTO, but they do require a concerted effort. And because of the nature of the WTO, you need consensus to make those changes. So a multilateral approach and a re-engagement with the US can only be helpful.
Mr. Kennedy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's I'd say everyone is cautiously optimistic. I think we're seeing a lot of not just with the United States. The European Union's new trade policy signaled openness for reform. I really think there is a moment right now, and if we can take advantage of it, we can make some meaningful progress. So certainly more hopeful than I was, say, this time last year, and I hope that some of that work starts soon.
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Poirier, you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Fay and Mr. Kennedy. Our re-engagement with the U.S. will be critical in the months and years ahead, especially on this one. I would even say that while the Americans did finally agree to appoint the new director, they were kind of dragged into it, kicking and screaming at the same time too. So I might not be as convinced yet that they're fully on board with WTO, but we do have CUSMA with them and other agreements probably in the future with them. So I'm not worried on that front, but I think that engaging them will only help us convince them of the merits of the WTO.
Thank
Madam
you very
Chair?
much.
Oh.
Yes.
Do I have time for one more question? But I clearly not.
I'm sorry that you don't. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Bonjour, je souhaite salutations, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. I'd like to greet the Westnesses as well. I would ask a few questions on the softwood lumber issue. I'd rather hear anyone who may have something new to add to that. In 2020, the WTO, of course, sided with the Canadian position on softwood lumber. Had Canada not pushed to solve this issue, we would still be stuck. The forestry industry in Quebec had advised us at that time that this was a temporary situation, but it wasn't permanent. Insofar as there was no long-term agreement on the issue, where we're just kicking the can down the road. What would be the impact of this decision by the WTO?
Answer Mr. Savard-Tremblay's question. I think for the most part, the WTO has been helpful for us, especially on this file, which has been a perennial trade irritant between us and our biggest trading partner to the south. But I agree, it's a constant battle, and it's frankly an unfair one, and it sort of octopuses out into different areas too that are related to softwood, but also involve pulp and paper and other manufacturing processes as well. So to the extent that we can leverage an agreement or some sort of structure to try and help avoid these problems in the future, certainly we in the manufacturing industry would be very supportive of it. My comments earlier that I alluded, the situations I alluded to where U.S. competitors sort of game the system and the trade tribunal system to their advantage is present, does happen in this sector as well. So we're very concerned about that type of action. And the problem too is that if it's not punished, it keeps going and keeps happening because it becomes a viable business strategy.
Et donc, dans ce cas, je reviens quand même.
Well, in this case, the impact of the WTO, is it going to give us a bit of an opportunity to get our second wind, or must there be a permanent agreement between the two countries in order to finally resolve the situation, of course?
That's a good question. I think that it's very difficult in sort of the structures that we have in international frameworks, whether that be CUSMA or otherwise, to sort of get these line items. We sort of have to have robust dispute mechanisms to do it. And I guess that comes back to my earlier point, where if that dispute settlement process is rapid, that's better for business. But also when we have the right data, and that's sort of where the WTO comes in again, and sort of that monitoring function. If it's when the data is scarce and it's sort of made up, that's where you can slip in garbage and try and get away with stuff that you otherwise wouldn't if you had right data. So, and also with strong monitoring and strong data, you can avoid the dispute settlement processes generally, because they will come in that if they have to present data and it's trash, then it's thrown out and dismissed right away.
Merci.
Thank you. Well, I'll expand a bit my question to address all of the witnesses. We're talking about a DSS that's based on the principle of justice, equity. Smaller players, as much as major players, have the same opportunities and the same protections, which is fine on a global scale. Now, if we take a look at the dispute settlement body and the complaints made by Ontario, they were granted some respite on the local scene and a number of local employees or manpower. But now it looks like we're taking a look at buying local and the impact on this can have. But Canada lost on this, on the dispute settlement body. Are the tools also have to be looked at?
Ne soyez pas si timide.
Don't be so shy, Andre. Go right to it.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's a great question. So, I mean, going back to the U.S. and the optimism around the new administration, of course, they also have implemented or reinforced their Buy American provisions, and I mean, all countries want to have that right to do that, but you want to be able to do it in a non-discriminatory basis. I mean, there are clearly tensions there that have to be worked out. I just want to go back to the previous question, and there are ways to speed up dispute settlement at the WTO that I'd mentioned. You know, the Secretariat is severely constrained on the information it can use. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to gather information, and they can't do that right now. And then, on dispute settlement itself, roughly two-thirds of all panel decisions are disputed. And it's now at a point where why not do it? And I think, we have ideas on how to speed up that process that would be beneficial to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fay. On to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes, and welcome. Glad to have you at the committee today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the witnesses. I think it was Mr. Fay. You had mentioned the TRIPS segment of WTO. I was wondering if you could expand on that in terms of IP rights around vaccinations, especially as obviously we're dealing with a great deal of vaccination talk now, and the temporary waiver that Canada hasn't signed on to and the impact of that.
Thank you for that question, and obviously it's incredibly topical. And there's an organization, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, released a report yesterday on this very topic. And the president of CIIT, Rohit Medora, is part of the commission that was behind that report. And I refer you to it, but I'll make, there's 4 points in that. And so, so obviously, as you indicated, patent rights are something that are integral to our trading system and the enforcement of them. And they give temporary monopolies to allow companies to take risks and get paid for those risks. But what this report really discusses is that in this case, the pharma companies have received enormous support from governments. And in fact, that support has mainly covered their R&D costs. And then they've benefited tremendously from public research. And so I guess the question would be, should they be allowed to enforce patent rights in this particular instance when there is obviously a global health emergency, a pandemic, and there are measures for compulsory licensing built in. I can't comment on Canada's position. I don't know enough about that, but I think there is a clear case that patent rights could be waived or considered to be waived for this pandemic.
And maybe the other witnesses could chime in as well and add your voice to that question.
I mean, in my case, I only know what I've read in the news. There's no interaction with members, so I don't have anything to say beyond, I think, what was already said.
Mr. Poirier, no?
Sorry, no.
Okay.
Nothing to add.
I do have another question, though, to Mr. Poirier. For a long time now, actually, I know that manufacturer and exporters have been talking about that domestic side of the problems that you have in terms of that growing, that export and so on. You also mentioned some of the domestic bodies that are involved, but I think, could you go into a bit greater explanation of that? I mean, I know that was it called Import in Canada, or there was several bodies that were supposed to increase that. There was also the discussions about reductions of what are they called? People who I've totally forgotten all the words. Anyway, the people who monitor agricultural exports and who make sure that the safety inspectors and so on. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be really helpful.
Certainly. What I was referring to were sort of the Canada's big agency, trade support agencies, right? So the EDCs, Trade Commissioner Service, those agencies. And what we've found is that for our members and exporters that use those services, they really like them. They're very helpful and they do the job. The problem is that when we survey our membership, most of the membership does not know that these places exist, let alone the specific programs that you just mentioned that are very helpful. There's been a retrenchment over the last number of years on sort of having these people from these agencies embedded, whether with us in the trade association or on the ground and having offices where people can walk in and talk to someone in person. That's sort of been pulled back quite considerably. And we could pretty much track that, where that sort of aimlessness began is when that retrenchment happened. So certainly having more people out in the field would be beneficial, but it's also leveraging us in the trade association world to help the government connect with these people. Picture if you're an SME exporter and you're like, gee, I wonder how I can, increase my market in X country. Well, you'll talk to your accountant, you'll talk to your legal advice, you'll talk to your staff. Your default setting is not to think, gee, I wonder what the government has to offer. So that's where trade associations and other people that are linked in can be leveraged. The other side of it too is the training, right? The trade skills training. So there's a number of programs, FIT being one of them, that we've partnered with in the past. And what that does is to create the capacity within Canada of skills training. So, of skills for trading for that profession, right? So most Canadian companies are SMEs. They have a certain bandwidth of what they can take on in terms of skills training. These types of programs with proper funding and proper outreach could be very beneficial.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poirier. I'm sorry, Ms. Matheson, your time is up. On to Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here on a Friday. It's great to see you all. What I'll start off with maybe is it comes back to the decisions made at the appellate body. They rule in our favor, then what? And that's one of the concerns I hear from a lot of people. And a good example is that when we had country of origin labeling in the U.S. with our beef sector, okay, we win the case. Now what? So do you see anything that should be done and should be part of Canada's stance in the redoing of the body to address that type of issue? Start with Mr. Fay. Actually, I think I'll start with you first, then go to Mr. Poirier. Mr. Fay? I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the last part of that, so I missed my names. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
I mean, I think the first step is really to fix the appellate body. I mean, nothing's going to happen until it's fixed, and there are ways to fix it. And I think a speedier resolution and more certainty is going to make things better for everyone. The appeal process beyond the appellate body, or I suppose enforcement, I think I'm going to have to pass it over to the people who are on the ground who are fighting these battles.
Okay, Mr. Poirier.
Yeah, it's a good question. It often does fall apart in the enforcement part of it. That might be tied into sort of the third pillar that I discussed about when we're talking about rules, right? And it's resetting rules. We might have to think about, and this is really out there, but reforming the rules of the WTO to sort of beef up that enforcement angle of it. How do you punish actors, players that don't abide by rulings? That's the only way I see it from the WTO perspective. But certainly, I'll echo what Mr. Fay says, that in terms of just getting them faster might discourage people, right? They know that if it takes years to do, that it's in their interest to go to the body, even if they know they're going to lose.
Yeah, I agree with you. The process, and I think even under the Trump administration, he did highlight a lot of flaws with the process that were being neglected and ignored that need to be addressed. And I assume under the Biden administration, we will still see the same things being brought forth, and we'll have to address them. And I think they need to be addressed. And I guess while we're addressing those issues, I'm wondering if we should not be addressing some of the other issues, like I said, enforcement. What used to bug me and cool is anything we did to retaliate also hurted Canadian sectors that we retaliate against. So I'd almost like to be able to retaliate with them exporting to Japan or somewhere else. So it doesn't at least hurt us, it hurts somebody else. But that's a different world. Mr. Kennedy, I was going to ask you, the CEOs right now with COVID, one of the things I'm hearing from my small businesses is they're trying to plan for the summer. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And I'm very concerned as we see other countries like Israel and the US so far ahead of us in vaccination, that they'll actually have their economies jumpstart before us, and they'll have to come in and scoop our customers. How big of a threat is that?
Well, I think we're all waiting, eagerly for opportunity to get our vaccines. And, just looking at business sentiment, I'll point towards something I saw this week that was quite interesting. So our counterpart organization in the United States, the Business Roundtable, they poll their CEOs on a regular basis on business sentiment. And it's quite clear that we saw that as vaccines are rolled out in the United States, we've seen a clear improvement in sentiment in the business community. I think, I hope we're in the same position by the summer. It all depends on our ability to receive our vaccines on time. And, fortunately to date, we haven't so far had any of our shipments delayed. But this goes to the core of things like the multilateral trading system, concerns around vaccine nationalism and ensuring that, our partners now and in the future, are playing by the rules and ensuring that, we have access to critical supplies and vaccines and so on.
Okay, and then Mr. Poirier, we're starting to see a rise in inventory levels at the manufacturing level. How concerned should we be in regards to that? What signal does that send to our economy?
It is a worrying trend that we started to see. It means that they might not have enough customers out there to buy their goods. And sort of piggyback on what Mr. Kennedy said too, when the further we fall behind, or that gap that between other countries sort of getting vaccinated and not having it, even if it's a small one, how it translates to business is that it means that our restrictions have to be in place that much longer. And that has an impact on our sectors in manufacturing, certainly as essential manufacturers, but it affects the movement of workers across borders. It affects all those types of flows as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoback. On to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much to all the presenters that are here today and their excellent testimony. And one of the pieces that I've heard again and again about the WTO is that the various suggestions that have been made, but in particular around the Ottawa group, and they've made some suggestions in regards to about the various supply chains. And I know for the the Canadian Manufacturers Association that's very, very important. It's important for communities like Sault Ste. Marie that I represent. And we talked about countries, but even within countries, there's certain sectors, and of course, I'm going to talk about steel and the steel manufacturing and the various things that have been presented around dumping. So, for the Canadian Manufacturers Association, if you could kind of give us your thoughts around, in particular, steel and the steel chain, and how the WTO has performed around there. I know we introduced a number of measures around anti-circumvention, in around scoping and market situation. And a lot of times when we were talking about that many years ago, people were saying that wouldn't be WTO compliant, but it has been compliant and it has been working. So I'm gonna ask the Canadian Manufacturers Association sort of comment around the WTO as it relates to steel manufacturing, and others. So thank you.
Yeah, no, certainly, as Mr. Sheehan knows, the steel sector is a very global sector, and they've fallen prey to a lot of the issues, the problems that I've talked about, dumping, and how that affects our relationship with our trade partners like the U.S. When they're worried about transshipments into Canada, into the U.S. from other countries. So these are all issues that the steel sector has had to deal with. I would say that a more robust WTO, especially the dispute settlement mechanisms, would be beneficial to them. I'm sure my friends in the steel sector would always think that it could do more to help them out, especially here in Canada, our domestic producers. And certainly any mechanism that would help. Sort of, it comes back to that data question again too, right? Are we collecting the right data? Are other actors fudging the numbers to an extent that it disadvantages our industries because we can't prove otherwise, right? In these areas. So all that sort of the efforts that I mentioned in my comments would certainly help the steel sector, our domestic steel sector.
Well, thank you very much. And for the Business Council of Canada, back in, I think it was 2019, Canadian business organizations comprised of your council and the Agri-Food Alliance, Chambers, and the Canadian Manufacturers Association just spoke. When you called on all WTO members to engage and intensify your efforts to restore the fully functional of the appellate body, and in the absence of the function, dispute settlement summit, the World Trade Organization simply cannot do its job to protect the rights of Canadian exporters and importers. Those are end quotes. To what extent and how would a fully functioning WTO dispute settlement system protect the rights of Canadian exporters and importers? So I'll start with the Business Council on that one.
Sure. Yeah, happy to answer that. I mean, in one piece, we have a temporary solution with the MPIA that was discussed before, and that covers some of our important trade partners, but it unfortunately doesn't include the United States. And that that really is an issue for us. The country of origin labeling was brought up before. This is something that came up recently in the new USTR's confirmation hearing about recreating a cool system that might survive a dispute at the WTO. So we have concerns we're going to have to be prepared for, and the MPIA while it will ensure that there is still a functioning dispute settlement mechanism with many of our trade partners, it won't cover that piece with the United States. So, it is really critical that we find a way to work with the U.S. to restore functionality of the appellate body in terms of the U.S.-Canada relationship and other countries that aren't part of the MPIA. But yeah, obviously, this is one of a list of priorities we have with the new administration.
And it's interesting. When I was way back in the day when I was in high school, then Trade Minister Jim Kelleher, a Conservative member, spoke to our class, and he started talking about what they refer to as backdoor tariffs, and I think back then it was on pork and swine, and both to our presenters, whoever wants to sort of to talk about that, how, and we studied on the trade committee too, as well as some other issues in around our grains and such, that countries are always there's a chance that there's a country that will use that, well, we don't use that particular product or vaccine or whatever on our
I'm sorry, Mr. Sheehan, but if you have a very short question, it was a very long question.
Okay, so I just very, very quickly, I would just ask very quickly the Business Council of Canada, what kind of backdoor tariffs are out there that you're aware of that your members are concerned about, if any?
I'm sorry, just a quick two-word answer if possible.
I'm sorry, at the moment nothing comes to mind, but there are lots of technical barriers and non-tariff barriers that our companies face.
Thank you.
To the committee members, if there's questions for any of the witnesses, can always write to the clerk, and the clerk will ensure that the witnesses get the questions that you didn't have a chance to ask at committee level, and get the information back to you. So thank you very much to our witnesses. We will suspend for a minute or two for other witnesses to come on board. Thank you again to our witnesses that we see you a lot here at this committee, and we appreciate very much the information and the good work that you're doing on behalf of Canada. Thank you. Welcome the officials now participating in the second panel. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Steve Burrell, Chief Trade Negotiator and Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations, and Ms. Kendall Hembroff, Director General, Trade Policy and Negotiations. The committee heard from the officials on this file March 11, 2020. This meeting today is to give us a bit of an update. For the information of the committee, we will be suspending at 1:45 or stopping the witnesses so that we can do some committee business for a few minutes. All right, thank you very much. On to Mr. Burrell, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to be here today to provide an overview on the government's engagement on WTO reform, including Canada's leadership of the Ottawa Group. In particular, I'd like to highlight some significant developments that have come out of the Ottawa Group since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I am joined today by my colleague from Global Affairs Canada, Kendall Hembroff, Director General of the Trade Negotiations Bureau. I think, as you mentioned, Kendall spoke to you last on WTO reform a year ago in March, days before things shifted to the new realities we find ourselves in today. But the important work continues, and in fact, it has intensified. First, let me provide some context. Canada is a founding member of the WTO, which was created in 1995. The WTO is critical for Canada as it governs trade between 164 members. Its framework of rules provides the necessary stability and predictability for an open Canadian economy to thrive. It is also the cornerstone from which all our free trade agreements are built. Even prior to the pandemic, the multilateral trading system was facing an increasingly challenging environment, characterized by the rise of protectionism, the use of unilateral trade measures, and this has led to difficulties in a number of areas, including, first of all, a stalemate in negotiations, secondly, a lack of consensus on how to treat developing countries, and thirdly, an impasse in appointments to the WTO's appeal mechanism. The pandemic has served to intensify many of these challenges. So against this backdrop, it has become apparent that we need a collective recommitment to the rules-based trading system, and in particular, to find multilateral approaches to managing the global economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ottawa Group has been a key vehicle for Canada to exercise leadership on WTO reform. As a small group of like-minded WTO members created in 2018 with the sole objective of supporting WTO reform efforts, the group has been an effective sounding board on WTO reform issues and has positioned Canada to play a leading role in advocating on behalf of Canadian interests. Most recently, the Ottawa Group has delivered excellent results in its response to the pandemic. Since the onset of the pandemic, the Ottawa Group has met twice at the ministerial level and 4 times at the vice ministerial level. A key achievement of the past year was the endorsement of the June 2020 joint statement focusing action on COVID-19, where Ottawa Group members committed to a 6-point work plan with concrete action items. A direct outcome from this statement was the endorsement of a communication on trade and health during the November 23rd Ottawa Group ministerial meeting. The communication calls on WTO members to avoid further disruptions in the supply chains of essential goods and proposes the launch of a multilateral WTO initiative on trade and health. This communication was presented to the WTO's General Counsel on December 16th and has set the stage for a busy work plan through 2021, leading up to the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference, which is now scheduled to take place in November of this year in Geneva. Ottawa Group members have also collaborated on a Singapore-led initiative against export restrictions on purchases of humanitarian food aid by the World Food Programme. Canada has also not lost sight of the ongoing WTO reform work, and we are advancing discussions within the Ottawa Group. A key priority for Canada and for other members is to address the current impasse in appointments to the WTO's appeal mechanism, also known as the appellate body. Driven by concerns about the appellate body's functioning, the United States has blocked new appointments to the appellate body since 2017. The last appellate body member's term expired in December 2020, which means that proceedings simply freeze if a party files an appeal. For a mid-sized country like Canada, this loss of recourse to binding dispute settlement has serious implications. We are among the top users of the WTO dispute settlement system and have been a disputing party in a total of 63 disputes, 40 as a complainant, 23 as a respondent since 1995. For example, our overwhelming win on softwood lumber at the WTO from 2019 remains in suspended animation because of the lack of an appellate body. Nevertheless, we can and do use the strong legal arguments endorsed by the WTO report in our continuing advocacy and legal work on behalf of our softwood lumber industry and workers. This situation provokes some creative problem solving on the part of Canada and the EU to develop a bilateral interim appeal arbitration arrangement in July of 2019 that ensures the continued enforceability of WTO decisions and provides for those decisions to be reviewed by an experienced group of arbitrators. This arrangement inspired the establishment of the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, also known as the MPIA. And this arrangement has 25 participants covering 51 countries, including the EU and China, and will apply between the participating members until the appellate body is functional again. In the meantime, Canada's priority remains finding a permanent solution to the appellate body impasse. Until that occurs, this interim arrangement safeguards our rights to binding two-stage dispute settlement with willing WTO members. Canada is also playing an active role in a number of ongoing WTO negotiations, including negotiations to limit harmful fisheries subsidies. Fundamentally, this negotiation is about helping to preserve the sustainability of global fish stocks for future generations. Members had committed to concluding negotiations by the end of 2020 in order to meet a UN Sustainable Development Goal. However, due to continuing divergences in members' positions and logistical challenges caused by COVID-19, and negotiations are still continuing. Canada has made a number of important contributions in these negotiations, including a proposal to discipline subsidies, contributing to overfishing and overcapacity. Challenges to the multilateral approach to negotiations have also led members to pursue negotiations through plurilateral approaches involving subsets of the overall membership. For example, willing members have launched plurilateral initiatives, or also known as joint statement initiatives, in areas such as e-commerce, investment facilitation for development, domestic regulation for services, and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. These negotiations have the potential to deliver significant benefits for Canadian business of all sizes, and Canada is actively participating in each of these. Canada is also keen to see work launched in new but important areas such as trade and environment and industrial subsidies, as well as continue to advance Canadian interests regarding the elimination of trade and production distorting agricultural subsidies. On the organizational side, we recently welcomed the appointment of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the new Director General. We are pleased that for the first time, the WTO has a Director General who was female and who is from an African country. We look forward to engaging the new Director General on WTO reform and the important work on the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the global economic recovery. To this end, we have invited her to attend the next ministerial meeting of the Ottawa Group on March 22nd. We also look forward to engaging with the US on WTO reform. While early signals from the new Biden administration have shown a willingness to engage more constructively at the WTO, we should not expect that US positions on a number of issues will have necessarily drastically changed. Bilaterally and through its leadership in the Ottawa Group, Canada will seek to find areas of alignment with the US to advance key WTO reform priorities. With that, Madam Chair, I would like to return to you for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Earl. It's nice to have you back at the committee so many times. For 6 minutes, on to Ms. Gray, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hembroff and Mr. Verhoel for being here, and nice to see you again. We had a written submission from the Canadian Canola Growers Association, and they have a number of recommendations in here. But I wanted to highlight one of them because it was also mentioned actually in our earlier witness testimony today, which is needing to improve timelines and quality of notifications. And so is that something that is being looked at by the Ottawa Group that you're aware of right now?
Yes, it certainly is something that we have been working on. And in fact, when we initially established the Ottawa Group, that was one of three of the main elements that we were looking to try to improve on: transparency, notifications, those kinds of issues were front and center. That still remains a fundamental objective, but over the course of the past year, we've also turned much of our focus to addressing issues that are specifically related to COVID-19. So, okay.
Good. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask, what changes discussed at the Ottawa Group meeting that was in November of 2020 on trade flows of essential medical supplies prevent the EU from using export controls to stop the flow of COVID-19 vaccines to Canada?
Well, on that issue, we did have specific discussions around that. And as I think you know, in November, we were discussing issues related to trade and health. This is a bit more of a long-term effort to try to make sure that we do have the ability to move WTO members in a direction where we can get rid of issues that are potential barriers like customs procedures, limiting the use of export restrictions, which goes directly to your point, eliminating tariffs, more transparency, and with the whole objective of strengthening global supply chains and ensuring the free flow of essential medicines and medical supplies. We're continuing to advance that initiative. With the recent issues around export restrictions by the EU, that has complicated the EU's position on that particular issue, but we're continuing to push it forward.
Okay, and actually on that note, there was one of the documents submitted to the WTO by the Ottawa Group for consideration. It's titled COVID-19 and Beyond Trade and Health. And on page 3, on export controls on COVID-19 vaccines, it says members will exercise restraint in the imposition of any new export restrictions, including export taxes on essential medical goods and on any prospective vaccine or vaccine materials. So which member of the Ottawa Group would have proposed this? Are you aware of that?
Well, there was broad support for that among the Ottawa Group, particularly at that point in time. As I mentioned, we have had a unanimous support on the Trade and Health Initiative, and it's been a main focus of what we've been trying to achieve moving forward. But as I mentioned, there is a bit of a complication more recently because of the new mechanism put in place by the EU, and that they're certainly assuring us that that will not be in place for a long period of time, but it is in place and it is causing some challenges.
But has Canada put forth any proposals to that might prevent this? Like, is there any proposals that we can do within that mechanism?
Within that mechanism itself, there's not much we can do because at this point, it's something where we're trying to build support for an initiative. There are no binding commitments as of yet. These are more ideas that we're putting forward. The EU, certainly in what we've been looking at, is within their rights to impose that kind of a regime that is allowed under WTO rules. We have had some concerns about how they've been applying it, particularly with respect to whether there is differential treatment being provided to different countries.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting is because Australia and the EU are both Ottawa, group members, and yet recently we saw Italy, an EU member, block AstraZeneca vaccines from being shipped to Australia through their export control measures. And so, would changes discussed at the Ottawa Group have prevented this from happening?
With respect to the Trade and Health Initiative, we don't think that it would have necessarily prevented that entirely. What we've been saying that if there are going to be any trade restrictions imposed, they have to be very temporary, a short period of time in place. They have to be as limited as possible, and members should try to get out of those export restrictions as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Short question,
go in a different.
Ms. Gray, please.
Okay, thank you. Just really briefly then, Ms. Hembroff, the last time that you were appeared at the committee, you mentioned that China has been very engaged on work with the Ottawa Group and that members have made proposals and presentations to the Ottawa Group. So has China made proposals to the group? And if so, what are they? And is that something that could be tabled to the committee?
1 year seems like a long time ago. So I think you correctly recall that I would have mentioned, at the time, and still continues to be the case, that the Ottawa Group welcomes having members that are not part of the group come and use the group as a sounding board for ideas. I know that China certainly had presented to the group some of its ideas in terms of a potential initiative on plastics, in particular plastics pollution. And that is actually an initiative now that is being discussed more broadly within the membership. I don't know whether or not China presented an actual piece of paper at the time and whether that is something that could be shared, but certainly we can share with you the resulting communication that ultimately Canada and other WTO members have co-sponsored that led out of that initial discussion on a possible initiative in terms of plastics pollution.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hembroff. On to Mr. Raya, please. Chandra?
Oh, sorry. I got it. Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a question which is slightly different than discussing about WTO. I recently had a meeting with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, and they have recommending that we create a position for Chief Implementation Officer. We have had many trade agreements, many successful trade agreements with so many different countries. and if the Trade Negotiation Bureau, some of the resources of the Trade Negotiation Bureau can be separated and a new Trade Implementation Bureau be formed with a Chief Implementation Officer. If experienced traders like the agri-food traders, if they find the need for a Chief Implementation Officer, I'm very much sure many of the small manufacturers, especially in the knowledge-based sector, many small companies do need the support in seeing that the benefits of these trade agreements be gotten to them. And having a chief implementation officer will also help the trade commissioners. They can access one single resource at global affairs, which can help them too.
Well, yes, to start with, I have had, along with my colleagues from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, fairly extensive discussions with CAFTA on the notion of a chief implementation officer. And we had the most recent of those discussions a couple of weeks ago. The discussion was more in the nature of exchanging ideas and posing some questions about whether this is the best path forward or not. Clearly, between our organization and AFC, we do all of this work. What CAFTA seem to be interested in is almost more the optical aspect of having a single place to go to, a single window. We can certainly look at something like that, but the notion of having a new position created that would deal with these issues would have a lot of overlap with what is already going on, and that person, whoever it might be, wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of hands-on knowledge as the rest of us that are engaged in all this. So we talked about that issue. They were going to go back and think a bit more, and on our side, we suggested perhaps it would make sense to look at something like a regular summit where we could have conversations between the agriculture sector and most of the people that are actually working on the ground on these issues in order to make sure that we get the details directly to them. So we see this as a process issue, one that I think we can fix. So we'll continue that dialogue.
Okay, as I mentioned, I thought if the experienced traders like CAFTA, if they are thinking in these terms, I was wondering the help that is required by small businesses. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in one of the previous committee meetings we had, I think from Canada Asia Pacific Foundation, who made a comment that instead of unilateral trade agreements, say with Indonesia, it will be good for Canadian supply management companies, the companies who are involved in supply management, supply chain, rather to have a regional agreement. Instead of focusing on Indonesia, it may be good to have a free trade agreement with the regional group like ASEAN. I know it may be difficult to achieve that. Maybe the process of free trade agreement with Indonesia can be a stepping stone towards a free trade agreement with ASEAN. But doesn't it look good to have multilateral, regional-based multilateral agreements than unilateral free trade agreements?
Well, it certainly does make sense to have a broader agreement than a more narrow agreement, but as you kind of implied, it sometimes makes sense to do what you're able to do at that point in time. But I would like to turn that question over to Kendall Hembroff, because she's been directly involved in those discussions, particularly with the ASEAN group in Indonesia.
Thank you. So Canada is continuing to pursue a possible Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement, which we've been pursuing since the launch of exploratory discussions now 3 years ago. And the pandemic has certainly reinforced the importance of an agreement with all of ASEAN, especially as an opportunity to be able to tap into regional supply chains. That doesn't preclude us from pursuing the possibility of bilateral agreements with ASEAN member states. And Canada recently conducted public consultations to seek the views of Canadians on a possible trade agreement with Indonesia. That type of agreement would be something that we could potentially pursue in parallel with the Canada-ASEAN FTA and might actually allow us to reach an agreement sooner and potentially more ambitious than might be possible on a regional basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Salutations, merci à l'ensemble des témoins.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of the witnesses. I'd like to verify with a current witness, has there been a meeting of the Ottawa group after the 23rd of November 2020? That's the last meeting we've heard of. Has there been any meetings since then?
We have not had a ministerial meeting since then. We do have one upcoming. We have had, I think, 2 vice ministerial meetings, and we've had ongoing meetings in Geneva among our ambassadors. We've also had meetings between many of us at headquarters with our counterparts as well. So there's been a lot of ongoing dialogue taking place, and a lot of activity.
Lors de la rencontre du
On the 23rd of November meeting, I think there was a proposal to offer a proposal to the WTO on a health and environment issues. This initiative would define short-term goals to protect chains of supply chains, of course, especially in medical terms, medical equipment and goods. Do you have further details on that? Because in some of these follow-up meetings that you've had, whether they were official meetings or not, how can we reconcile this to perhaps smoothen the availability of these materials, medical equipment and such? And how can we become less dependent on external sources of medical devices?
Okay, thank you. And that is certainly something that we've been focused on very intently. After we did have the meeting back in November, we have been working towards trying to develop a statement that could be presented to the WTO General Council. We did initially present a statement to the WTO General Council on December 17th of last year. We did get quite a bit of support, but we've been working on it since then to build some broader support, and we've been conducting outreach activities. And now our target is to try to build support for the adoption of a WTO Declaration on Trade and Health at the General Council meeting in May. We're also looking forward to the next ministerial conference, MC12 in Geneva, as I mentioned, would be in November of this year, so that we can take a look at where we're at on the Trade and Health Initiative, and also see if we can start to get a broader negotiation going on these issues to meet the very objectives that you outlined. We want to make sure that we can avoid a lot of the difficulties we've had over the past year by removing export restrictions, making sure that any kind of actions taken in periods of critical shortages are targeted, transparent, proportionate, temporary. We're trying to get rid of any kind of tariff restrictions. All in all, an effort to try to make sure that trade, particularly in these types of products, moves as freely and openly as possible.
Merci, j'aimerais.
Thank you. So I guess it will develop and flow quite quickly in future. I have another area I'd like to ask you a few questions about, that of softwood lumber. We know that there was a decision in Canada's favor last year, and yet a lot of the representatives of the industries were telling us to be prudent and cautious because there's no real grounded agreement. There's no closure on the issue. How will this orient Canadians' future industry on this softwood issue, lumber? softwood lumber issue, excuse me.
Well, yes, the softwood lumber issue has been a long-standing irritant. We do have a total of 6 legal cases that we have been pursuing on softwood lumber against the U.S. Over the past number of years. We have cases under the earlier NAFTA that have not yet led to a conclusion. We have cases that we've initiated under the new agreement, the new trilateral agreement, the CUSMA, and we have 2 ongoing cases before the WTO. So we have a number of challenges out there. We've met with a considerable degree of success, as we usually do in these cases on softwood lumber. But in particular, we have the concern that with respect to both softwood lumber cases that we have taken at the WTO, those have been appealed. And given that the U.S. took the action that they did to ensure that we do not have a functioning appellate body, those cases have essentially been appealed into the void, and there's no immediate resolution. So we still think the arguments and the original panel decisions on those issues are very helpful to us. We're still pursuing, within the trilateral context with the U.S., the remaining 4 cases. And we tend to win almost all of these cases. So we're hoping that that will put enough pressure on the U.S. to start thinking that maybe it's time to get back to the negotiating table and try to sort something out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burrell. On to Mr. Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I was hoping that you might be able to share with the committee some of the early signals and signs coming out of the new Biden administration. I mean, this study committee started under the Trump administration. You know, obviously the appellate body had its work had been compromised by the fact that it didn't have enough members. So I think that was, you know, that was part of the genesis of the Ottawa group, and it was part of what was going on when we started this study. Pretty significant change to have a new president now in the United States. I'm just wondering if you want to provide some reflections about what you think that means for the WTO generally, and also what you think it means for the work of the Ottawa group.
Well, I think that we have seen some important and significant differences coming out of the Biden administration so far, and they've certainly indicated a very strong willingness to engage with allies, work with allies to try to find solutions, and we've already started some very good dialogues in that direction. When it comes to some of these trade issues in particular, we do see that the Biden administration has not really taken a position yet on how they're going to approach these issues, particularly the impasse on the appellate body questions. So we're going to have to wait and see for a bit longer. We've been having dialogue with officials within U.S. Trade Representative's office, and those have been constructive as well. But they're basically telling us until the new U.S. Trade Representative is confirmed in her position, they're reluctant to go too far out in terms of what the positions might be. With respect to the Ottawa group, I think certainly once Catherine Tai is confirmed as the U.S. Trade Representative, which we expect will happen within days, we will be seeking to have a meeting with her and the Ottawa group and start the process of trying to dig into this issue and see if we can find some solutions.
One of the issues that's come up lately in respect to the WTO has to do with the TRIPS provisions and intellectual property rights, something I'm hoping we're going to be able to do a deeper dive into at this committee soon. But I'm just wondering, you know, obviously Canada has not yet signed on to the proposal for the waiver. What are some of the concerns that Global Affairs has about such a waiver?
Well, I think, and first, I would like to make it clear, because I think there's been confusion off and on, but we have not rejected the proposal for a TRIPS waiver. There are obviously a significant number of WTO members supporting a TRIPS waiver, and the proposal was, as you know, put forward by India and South Africa. But there are also a number of members that are outright opposing the waiver proposal. So there's no consensus on a way forward, which leaves us, at least for the moment, effectively stuck. So what we've been trying to do as Canada is see if we can find a way to dig a little deeper into some of the issues, see if we can try to find solutions that could be accepted more broadly. And that's the tack that we've been taking. We very much want to find a solution. And most recently, we've started to support what is clearly a parallel track of the WTO Director General's so-called Third Way effort, which involves a dialogue directly with the pharmaceutical industry, looking at where we have production challenges and how can those be fixed, where we have distribution challenges, how can those be fixed. So the problem is very, very clear. How we can best address it, I think, is an ongoing challenge. We're certainly optimistic about this third way that the WTO Director General is pursuing. Doesn't mean we drop the issue of the TRIPS waiver. We continue to work on that as well, and it's a matter of trying to make sure that we can solve this issue as quickly as we possibly can. We just don't want to get in a position where we're going to get stuck and not make progress.
On Wednesday, there was about 30 civil society organizations in Canada that wrote the Prime Minister in support of the TRIPS waiver. I'm wondering, whether that letter has been brought to your attention, appreciating that it may take a little bit of time for those things to travel within government. And whether your plan as you proceed on this issue would be to consult with those organizations as well as the pharmaceutical industry to get a sense of where Canadian groups are at on this, to try and represent the will of Canadians as much as possible in this matter.
We would certainly be happy to consult with those groups to talk about this issue, to start to see if we can find paths forward. I mean, we really do recognize the challenge of this, and it's essential that we find solutions to it. So very happy to engage in those discussions, and very happy to continue to try to work to find solutions on this.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate those insights into the issue. And that's all for me, Madam Chair. I don't know if I'm out of time anyway, but
you had 15 seconds left. So I was just trying to let you know that there was no time. Okay, on to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay there? I'll take that as yes. Okay, thank you again for coming to committee. My first question is, how much does Canada pay every year to the WTO? Is there a fee that we have to pay?
Yes, there is. I have to confess I don't know what it is offhand, but it's kind of scaled to the economic size of each of the memberships. So the larger economies pay the most, we pay somewhat less.
Okay. Is one of the problems with maybe where we're at with the WTO today, maybe versus 25 years ago, is that we can't even agree on maybe who is a developing country? Is that an outstanding issue, you think, on this situation? Like, I'm guessing China and India and Brazil and Mexico and others are all classified as developing countries, and there are some arguments for that, obviously. But when they're in the top 20 and some are in the top 10, how can we have a legitimate organization that can't even recognize what's developing and which is developed? Any thoughts on that? Sure, it's contentious.
Well, yes, it is contentious, and the actual discussion is more in the nature of, yes, we recognize that there are developed countries and there are developing countries, and we're not necessarily arguing with that distinction. Where the debate more recently has been is that there are significant differences between developing countries or among developing countries. There are very advanced, very large economies in some developing countries. Other developing countries are very small in economic terms, have little influence, and are in a much different kind of situation without the same kind of advantages that others have. So the challenge is, how do we differentiate among developing countries in terms of the kinds of obligations we would expect them to take on.
Isn't it true though, like most of the countries in the WTO are in the developing category?
Yes, that's true. The majority are, yes.
Yeah, maybe we should all just agree that we'll all become developing countries and we all get along. I say that tongue in cheek. The WTO says one of their functions is monitoring. They monitor. Now, I'm looking at the durum wheat situation in Italy.
Yep.
Has the WTO monitored that? Did they let us know we have monitored this and they are wrong? That would be a basic function for them to do.
Well, when we talk about monitoring by the WTO, it's not so much an issue of monitoring individual issues. They tend to monitor whether WTO members are submitting the necessary transparency with respect to everything from subsidies to export restrictions to various measures that there should be transparency about, their spending levels, all of those kinds of things. So it's more of an aggregate monitoring of what each country is doing.
Fair enough. But when I read on their website, it says periodic scrutiny of their trade policies and practices. Now, to me, I look at and I know Mr. Verheerel, like you are very well respected, obviously, and I've got a great deal of respect for you. And I know you're in a tough position to critique this on the record. So I'm not trying to make you do something that's going to get you offside here. But it seems to me that it would be the WTO, if they were monitoring trade policies and practices, they would read the news and say, well, it looks to me like Italy is doing something to Canada and the durum wheat. Maybe we better look into this as a monitoring function. Does that ever happen?
It does happen, but it's in a different kind of context, because in addition to the general monitoring and the reporting function that every WTO member has to report significant amounts of information to the WTO for examination by others, what we also have is a more narrow review of each individual member under the trade policy review mechanism. So when it comes to a review of the EU, which I think happens every couple of years, all members have the opportunity to talk about concerns they have with respect to the EU. And certainly the cool issue
is, Madam Chair, is Mr. Verheerel, is he frozen there? Could be. Okay. Okay. Well, my next question then is maybe to Ms. Hembroff there. The role the WTO actually plays in trade deals. So maybe I'm naive to this whole situation, but I look at the USMCA trade deal. Does the WTO play any role in that when we're renegotiating NAFTA into the USMCA?
So maybe I can start to answer that question. I think that Mr. Verheerel is on his way back in.
I'm back.
Did you hear the question? Okay, yeah. Great.
Okay. Okay. No. Yes. For any kind of free trade agreement that is negotiated, there is a process under the regional trade agreements provisions at the WTO to review those trade agreements and determine whether they meet the requirements that a trade agreement must meet in order to be considered a valid trade agreement by the WTO. Now, I will admit that this process is not necessarily as rigorous as it might be, but there is a review. Countries have an opportunity to ask questions about the free trade agreement, and it does have to meet certain requirements, such as covering substantially all trade, for example.
Okay, thank you. My time's likely up, Ms. Groh, is it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Lobb.
Okay, I'd just like to thank Ms. Hembroff and Mr. Verheerel, because it must be extremely frustrating dealing with all this stuff, and I appreciate your efforts in what seems an impossible task. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lobb. And yes, the time is up. We have to do some committee business. So I want to thank Ms. Hembroff and Mr. Verrill. I am sure it won't be too long where we'll have you back before us again, sharing your knowledge and your information. So to our witnesses, you are free to go. Thank you very much. You can disconnect, and we will move on to briefly doing some committee business. On this particular issue of the WTO, the analyst will now proceed with preparing a draft report on the testimonies heard and submissions received by the Committee on the WTO Reform. I'd like to ask the members, any who have special instructions for the analysts, if they would please send them to our clerk by next Wednesday, March 17th. And if members have no objection, we can close the window for submissions of brief on that Wednesday, March 17th as well. So if that's all right with everyone, that's where we'll move on to that fact there. Now we have two motions here. I have a motion from Mr. Blakey. I'm sorry, before I deal with Mr. Blakey's motion, I see a hand up from Mr. Savard Tremblay.
Alors, je voulais tout simplement signifier que...
Well, I have two motions as well, but I understand that it'll be following those presented by Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Mr. Blakey, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I know we just had some discussion already today about the TRIPS waiver here in committee and also in question period. It's a topical issue that has to do with vaccine supply during the pandemic. I think it falls well within the jurisdiction of this committee to take a look at it, given that it's at the WTO that the issue is taking place. And so I think this would be a very appropriate forum to hear from folks on various sides of the issue to try and understand it a little better and find a good path forward. So I beseech members of the committee to support the motion today so that we can undertake that study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you able to hear me fine?
Yes, I am. We are.
Great. Thank you. I had to switch devices here. I'm wondering if Mr. Blakey would be amicable to one minor amendment, or it's actually an addition to his motion, which would be to add the words and investment. So it would read, the committee undertake a study of Canada's trade and investment policy and trade agreements. And it does fully fit in within the mandate of our committee, and I'm wondering if he would approve of that amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Blakey?
Sure. I certainly don't have any objections to that wording change, provided that, it's not going to undercut being able to get the study underway, but I don't see any problem with it. We'd be happy to accept that amendment.
Okay. And I also have Mr. Sheehan.
Just on my the motion that we talked about on Monday that I had introduced about a week and a half ago. So I'll just wait. I'll wait my turn.
Can we deal with Mr. Blakey's first, and then we'll deal with yours, Ms. Bendayan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to the motion before us.
All right. Thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Did you want to speak to it?
Yes, please.
Please go ahead.
So the motion before us that Mr. Blakey put forward, and now the amendment from Ms. Gray, just to advise that I am fully in support of studying this. I think that we just heard from the witnesses earlier that it is something that Canada is very much engaged on, and I think it would be interesting to look into it. With respect to the amendment proposed by Ms. Gray, I would just ask, in what way does this change the study? Because as Ms. Gray knows, the TRIPS agreement is, the focus of the TRIPS agreement is trade-related intellectual property rights, and I just want to ensure that we still keep the focus of the amendment on IP rights. Investment does bring in a whole other aspect.
Ms. Gray, did you want to comment on Ms. Bedayan's question?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Yes, no, it basically just it's so that it opens it up in case there's, some other witnesses that might cross over, and so the focus will be as it's laid out, because the rest of the motion does define the TRIPS agreement and everything. This just broadens it slightly, so that in case there were some witnesses where there was crossover, it just gave us more opportunity to hear from some different people.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Hoback. You're on mute, Mr. Hoback. No, Mike. Randy,
How's that?
There you go. There you go.
All right. Been having problems with my mic this morning. I apologize. We heard from the last round a witness who talked about how investment, and because there's been so many governments investing in these vaccines, that it would trump IPO rights, or has a way to trump IPO rights. And it's a curious idea. When does government investment actually take precedence as far as who actually has ownership of the intellectual property in this case? And is there anything there that needs to be explored? Because IPO is very important. I think Ms. Bedan would agree with me, and Mr. Blakely would agree with me. And we want to make sure that we have these companies doing this research ongoing for the next pandemic or next issue. So I don't want to do anything that would ever dissuade or make it so that other companies just say, no, we're not interested. Yet in the same breath, if we are spending a lot of public money in the development of these, then we should talk about that too, and how that impacts intellectual property.
Okay, Mr. Lobb.
Thank you very much, and it's fantastic discussion. And the thoughts that the committee may want to look at, and again, what do I know, is the fact that Pfizer, for example, I don't believe they took any government subsidy or funding for the development of their vaccine. And I think that they are selling their vaccine at a for-profit business model, if you want to call it that, where other pharmaceuticals took government money and have made an arrangement, I think, to sell at cost, etc. I think the committee might find that an interesting situation.
Thank you, Mr. Lobb. Is there any further comments on Mr. Blakey's motion as amended? Do we want a recorded vote on this?
If there's a consensus for it to pass, Madam Chair, I don't see any.
I don't see any objection. So
I think there is consensus, yes.
There's consensus. So all those in favor, it's unanimous and is carried. Thank you. On to Mr. Sheehan. That was as amended, by the way. I'm sorry, I should have said that. As amended. On to Mr. Sheehan's motion. Mr. Sheehan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And I read this into record and I've circulated it, so I don't know if it's necessary due to time and to get on to Mr. Savard Tremblay's in introducing some motions. I would just ask the committee to vote on this now. It's a very important subject and it captures a lot, and I'm open it back up to the floor, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Lobb.
I thought mine was up first.
Sorry, I've called Mr. Lobb now, Mr. Wright. I'll get to you. Mr. Lobb?
Thank you. I would just propose to Mr. Sheehan with a friendly amendment to include nuclear, and to the broadest extent you could include nuclear into it, and just recognizing from CANDU all the sourcing, servicing, supplying, including a finished reactor. Any way that you can put it in there that makes Mr. Sheehan happy would satisfy me, but seeing a Bruce Power is in my riding and largest nuclear reactor in the world, I thought that they should be included in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lobb. I have Mr. Raya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a good motion, a very important one on clean energy, but I do see that it lacks one critical thing. In the clean energy space today, the growing viability factor for the clean energy is the energy storage, and that is batteries. Batteries not just for electric vehicles, but as an energy storage system. And in that batteries, this motion deals with exportation, but we have to focus also on the importation of these technologies so that we can use those technologies for the development of the industry, from mines to manufacturing to technologies. In the US, in the last 1 year, 4 or 5 major projects close to $10 billion have been announced for the development of batteries, focusing both for electric vehicles and for energy storage system. So I think when we deal with the clean energy, we should also recognize the growing importance of the battery technologies as energy storage, which makes clean energy more viable, and also focus on the trade commissioners helping us to get the technology so that the manufacturing can be done in Canada. If they can be manufactured viably in the US, we can also get it done in Canada. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Certainly, when you do your witness list, I'm sure those are some of the witnesses that you're going to want to make sure is there. Now, I'm not sure if it's Miss Gray or Miss Blakey that's, which was first. So, they're all just across the front. So I'm going to go to Mr. Blakey, then I'll go to Mr. Gray. Miss Gray. Mr. Blakey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say, I'd be happy to undertake this study. I am concerned and hopeful that we might be able to move quickly to the study on the WTO TRIPS proposal. So I would feel far more comfortable voting in favor of the study if it were clear in the motion that we were going to undertake this study after the TRIPS study. And I'm wondering if there might be a willingness on the part of Mr. Sheehan and the committee to make that will clear.
Can I have a comment back from Mr. Sheehan?
On those three comments, I'll take care of those now. And yes, as it reads, it says examination of Canadian clean technologies such as hydroelectricity, wind energy, solar energy, carbon sequestration, carbon capture, grid management, and plastic recycling. That's a such as, but I think I would be more than willing to add, especially grid management. Grid management's a lot about batteries too. There's a part of it, but just put batteries in there. And to MP Lob, yes, let's add a comma nuclear in there as well to talk about the good things that he is proposing as well. So yeah, I'll accept all those two. And then to Mr. Blakey, yes, when at the last meeting I just had mentioned, this would be about a 3 or 4 meeting study, maybe 4 now with those 2 more things introduced. And I said we could plug it in as we need to, as we go along on this important study. So obviously I've just voted to support Mr. Blakey's motion. So I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. On to Ms. Gray.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first, I think sort of priority of studies, I do agree that Mr. Blakey's is probably more timely because of what we're dealing with. For Mr. Sheehan, I'm wondering if you're amicable. I mean, another thing that we could add in here is LNG, and we could probably add in another 10, 20, 30 items to the list. So perhaps maybe the best way to address this is to, rather than being prescriptive and listing everything that we could possibly think of, is if we actually don't list anything and just leave it more general. Just clean technology and then move on, and then it gives more option, because if this study isn't going to happen very soon within the next week or so, there might be other emerging ideas that come to us. So rather than being so prescriptive, maybe I would like to suggest we just keep it general, and then each of us, as we have different witnesses and ideas, can bring it forth at that time.
And well, one of the things that, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I could reply to that quickly. And like the carbon capture sequestration, that does go around sort of some of the industries that you were talking about, and some of the great technologies that they're doing, trying to get down to net zero. So I think that it's a such as, and as the chair mentioned, that anyone who wants to bring forward witnesses around clean tech and anything, I think would be up to the MP's purview. I was just using this as an example, and you're right, we could probably list 10, 20, 100 things. So it's just examples. So I would welcome the introduction of whomever would like to testify that's doing great work in Canadian clean technology. So the message is understood. So thank you.
Ms. Bendayan, please. Oops. You're muted.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Sheehan, for putting forward the motion and to the amendment proposed by Mr. Lobb, which I am supportive of. I just wanted to indicate that we are now at 2:58, and I think rather than having an extensive discussion about the calendar and scheduling and where we're going to put these motions, which we haven't done for any of our other previous motions, I would suggest if we are almost close to finishing debate that we vote on the motion before us as is with the amendment if it's necessary to vote on them separately. I'm not sure, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Abatai.
Yeah, I want to make sure, first of all, it's a good motion by Mr. Sheehan. I think this is a study that we really need. And I would echo Ms. Gray's suggestion that just to keep it broad, because I think there's every day almost something new coming into this industry and to improve the green in general environment and so forth. And I think we are in the middle of it in Canada, and it would be nice to keep it open, keep it generic, and allow us to invite. I want to make sure that nothing in the motion that will limit our ability to invite witnesses.
Okay, Ms. Gray, is your hand back up again? Sorry, Ms. Gray?
Yes, Madam Chair. I was just going to make the suggestion that perhaps we just say such as, but not exclusive to, or such as, but not. I'm trying to think of the wording here. I'm just going off the top. Just so that it's really clear that we can open this up, and as we've said, there might be other ways that we haven't even thought of. So such as, but not.
Limited to.
Limited to, yeah, that's thank you. That was where I was thinking.
Mr. Sheehan, this is your motion as with a suggested amendment from Mr. Lobb. Are you want to change it, or do you want to have a vote on your original motion as amended by Mr. Lobb, or?
I don't. It's a very difficult doing this sort of on the fly, but yeah. I think we get the message that it's opened up and that people can draw their witnesses they want. Accepting, okay. Mr. Lobb's nuclear one and very specific, but the such as and that the wordsmithing, those are examples therein. So it's green technology. So I mean, the witnesses should be in line with the intent of the motion, and I think the way it is now with the amendments, yes. Including nuclear, and then the batteries, which would be under grid management. And then for the LNG, et cetera, that's under carbon sequestering as an example therein. Some of the.
Okay, Mr. Sheehan, we're running out of time. Okay. If we want to vote on this, I'm sorry. Yeah. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, did you want to speak to Mr. Sheehan's motion?
No, not specifically. The time is moving on. I want to make sure that I do have a few motions in the work.
If we can vote on Mr. Sheehan's motion, does anybody want a recorded vote? Or I think the intent is pretty clear. We want this to be as broad as possible, and we'll Chair? Get to it when we can. Yes, Madam Clerk.
I just want to be clear that the words that will be added to the motion will be batteries and nuclear. Mr. Yes. Sheehan is saying yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So do we want a recorded vote on this, members of the committee, or is everybody in favor? I don't see any objection. Everyone's in favor of Mr. Sheehan's motion. It carried. I know, Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you were trying to get our attention. It is 3:02.
Oui, j'avais deux motions de routine à présenter.
I have two routine motions to propose.
Introduce your motion at the beginning of the next, or give notice to the clerk, so it would be ready to deal with.
Elles ont été.
Well, they've been registered with the clerk prior to this meeting.
Is it the will of the committee to allow Mr. Savard-Tremblay to speak to?
I'm sorry, Chair. I have to leave. I have a meeting right away.
So, and I just suggest, Mr. Savard-Tremblay, I'm sorry. It's just there's just running out of time. You've given notice to those motions, and if you like, then I will, if you're going to introduce them and speak to them at the next meeting, we will have to have that on the agenda, I believe is the process. Madam Clerk, am I correct?
Well, it's up to the committee to decide, yes.
Yes, is that the will of the committee today, is to have Mr. Savard-Tremblay, give him some time to speak to his motions at our next meeting? 1, 2 is the will of the committee. Yes, so Mr. Savard-Tremblay, we will set aside a few minutes at our next meeting so that you can speak to the motions that that you have already tabled. All right, everybody's good? Have a wonderful...
Perhaps at the beginning of the meeting.
And thank you all very much for all of your great work. Have a wonderful week. I hope everybody gets lots of sunshine. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Judy. Bye-bye. Welcome to British Columbia if you want sunshine.
I'd love to. Okay. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.